Hey everyone, thank you all for joining the call and taking the time out of your day to do that. I hope everyone's having a good Friday and looking forward to the weekend. So welcome to the training. This is going to be specific to expenses. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with everyone, just so everybody can share my screen. So if you get that invitation, just go ahead and accept it. All right, so today's topic of discussion is expense report training. Again, I appreciate everyone joining and also the patience and time everyone spends on the expense report process. You'll notice the call is mute. It's a webinar just because there's some folks from the sites with like bulldozers and stuff joining. So, if you have questions, feel free to ask them all along the way. You can do it in the Skype chat, and at the end of the call, I'll go ahead and I'll answer and make sure everybody's questions do get answered. So for those of you who may have heard, there is a new expense report form on TKN, and our agenda for today's training will actually be, one, how to download the new form from TKN, a general overview of the Canadian expense report process, 4 key elements of an expense audit, and ways you can, ensure you get reimbursed quickly. Then we'll go into a live training example, and finally we'll have a Q&A where you can ask questions, and I'll actually open up the call so everybody can actually, speak as well. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and do that. So, step 1, how are we going to submit an expense report? We're going to need the form, right? So you can download the form by clicking the link here and actually going to the TKN Finance page. So when you go to the Finance page on TKN, you'll see the new expense report form. Click, select it, and then what you'll get is an error. So basically, what this means is that there's some unsupported formulas and scripts in this Excel document, so SharePoint doesn't actually want to support this. So it asks you, would you like to try and open this file in Excel? And then you select yes if you want to, yeah. If you want to, okay, whatever works. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry about that, guys. Yes, so you would select OK, and you would open the file in read only. And once you do that, the file would open up, and then you go ahead and save it on your desktop, and then you're free to use the form. So that's just how to download the form from TKN itself. Next, we're just going to go through the Canadian expense report process, just so everyone has a good understanding of what that is and ways you can avoid getting your expenses delayed, which I know everybody wants to get their expenses reimbursed quickly. So step 1, you as the employee would incur a business expense, and what you would do is you would go ahead and prepare and submit an expense form and submit it to your supervisor for approval. And then your supervisor would actually go ahead and send you back the expense report. And once you receive the expense report back from your supervisor, you would go ahead and send it to Toronto Payables at tcco.com. So that's a shared mailbox within a few individuals that actually audit expenses and get them processed for you. So then our accounting team would go ahead and review and audit the expense reports that you send, and we'll be looking for issues and compliance, things of that sort. Then, once our accounting team has gone and reviewed and audited the expense report form, we would send the expense report form to our FM, Sabrina, for approval. And then once she signs off, then we're in the last stage, which is sending it off to Central Finance in Cincinnati, and then that's where the magic happens. They process the expense report in SAP, and then on Friday, on pretty much our EFT runs every Friday, so you would get an email from the CFC saying that there's a payment initiated, and you typically would receive the funds 2 business days after that. And then just to give everyone a reimbursement time frame, our goal is 2 weeks from the date that you submit, provided no follow-ups are required. So I know some of you on the call may be thinking, hey, I've submitted an expense report, it's taken 3 weeks or 4 weeks, let's say, worst case. Yes, in the past it has, and I can tell you why. It's probably related to one of these common errors or that's causing the delay. So some of those are, for your first expense report, we got to get you set up in SAP, so that takes about a week. So you can typically expect at least 1 week delay on your first expense report. The next common delays is improper documentation and approvals, the expense report form not being sent as one PDF, multiple files. Surprisingly, funny enough, it's always the superintendents that do send it with multiple files. So I don't know why, but just a funny fact. Incomplete or inaccurate coding. So there is reference in the expense guide on TKN as well regarding coding. So just make sure that you're using complete coding, and you can always verify the coding with the project manager or your accountant to make sure that the coding is accurate. And then lastly, when the expense report is not compliant with our policy, and we'll go into that further. So the 4 key elements of an employee expense audit are here for everyone to see. So number 1, we're looking for compliancy with our expense policy, and you can find those resources directly from TKN, and you can actually see what is compliant and what is not compliant. If you want a summary, Sabrina actually sent an email not too long ago that actually has a summarized version of what the compliance memo is for 2018. So just an FYI for everyone that is on the call and wondering about that. Secondly, we're looking for proper documentation, and that relates to backups and receipts, right? So a lot of our jobs, especially in Toronto, tend to be cost plus. So a cost plus is kind of like, we bill the owner for certain things that are reimbursable, and the client will sometimes have audit rights on our jobs. So if they have audit rights, it's very important that we have the proper documentation, so if they ask, we can actually provide that and not say, oh, we don't have it because we didn't ask for it, or we just were neglectful, and things like that can actually damage our reputation, which is why we always want to make sure we have backups and receipts. You could also refer to the guide on how to provide backups and what we're looking for with respect to that. And also making sure coding is complete. Then we're looking for proper approvals, and what that means is that your expense report has been approved by your appropriate supervisor and the financial manager. So all you guys got to do is just make sure you get the expense report approved by your supervisor before you send it to Toronto Payables, and of course sign it yourself as well. The last element is the proper tax setting. So this is one of the most significant enhancements in the new expense report form. So what this is it's mostly automatic. So from now on forward, most of the time that you enter your expenses, it'll automatically calculate the tax. However, there are some cases where the employee would have to manually select the setting of tax. And that is especially for if you're outside of the country, or you're expensing something that's tax exempt, or you're traveling between provinces on a suitcase assignment, for example, like if you're a Vancouver employee and you have a suitcase assignment in Toronto and most of your expenses are incurred in Ontario, it would probably be safe to assume that the Ontario tax setting would apply there, and vice versa. And usually the U.S. is tax exempt because we don't actually pay the taxes to Canada, so we can't claim it back from the CRA. Next, I'm just going to go into a live training example with the new form, just kind of show you some of the new things and how to fill it out. So I have the Excel here, and it's pretty straightforward, So you would go to the name section, you would enter your name, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. First name, last name, and then location. I work in Ontario, so I'm going to select Ontario. You'll notice that the drop-down menu is a little bit tiny. So this actually is to do with your zoom in. So you can actually zoom in on your monitor and make that larger. I'm just using my laptop right now, so it looks really tiny. So then you would enter the date of your expense. So I'm just going to put the 1st of January 2018. And for that, you would then select the purpose of the expense, and you have a bunch of options for the purchase of the expense. So for this example, I'm just going to say that I expensed a taxi cab home from the holiday party, for example. Which was a good thing to do. And as you can see, it automatically calculated that Ontario tax setting would apply, and then all I would have to do from my perspective is enter the total value of that, which is $100, which is an expensive taxi ride, but just for example purpose. So you'll notice that the tax column is protected. There's a reason for that. In the past, we actually had the employees manually input the taxes, and what we figured out over time is that maybe we should automate this and make it a little bit easier for the employees. So the best part of this is now you only have to worry about it in certain situations. Now, after you've entered the total value of your expense, you would have to enter the coding. So for me, I'm an office employee. I don't work on a specific site. So I would be charging G&A for most of my expenses, whereas some of you other folks would be charging projects, for example. So with G&A, very important to enter your department code and the profit center. So if I was interpreting this in language, what I've put right now just basically translates to Finance Department Toronto, and then I have to put a GL code. So we had one specially made for the holiday party, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So that's my coding for that. And then let's just say I had mileage as well. So I'm going to say I went from the office to the Metrolink site, for example. Now you're going to see that you get a prompt saying a separate line is required. What that means is you have to separately, every time you enter mileage, it has to be a separate independent line item. So you can't expense mileage here when you have an expense there in total expense already. So let's just say the next day I traveled to the Metrolink site for a project billing meeting. Okay, and so again, I don't have to enter anything in the total expense column, and what I would do is, again, I would use the same finance department and the travel code this time. Excel help. I don't need Excel help. Okay, and then the from location, to make it easy for everyone, if everyone can just use Office for your business unit, and the to location, just name the project site instead of putting the address. That'll be helpful for those of us who are processing it here. And also, with mileage, you would have to include a backup from Google Maps, which we'll go into a little bit later. So for the from location, I left from the office, so I'm going to put the office, and the to location will be Metrolinx, for example, and the distance is 100 kilometers. So now you'll see that it's automatically calculated that. And again, if I don't have an auto allowance, so I will tell you that, but for those of you that do, you would select yes, which would adjust your reimbursement value for your mileage to the approved amount for those individuals with an auto allowance. So for now, I've put it as no because I don't have an auto allowance. And then for our next example, I am going to say that I had a business meal with my buddy Turner, accounting, meeting, business meal. So that's the purpose. So the Turner accounting meeting is the purpose of the business meal. And let's just say I had this meal with Mr. Ken from Vancouver. And then because he is from Vancouver, I would also state that he's from Turner, and I would list his title as well. And again, you're going to get a reminder every time you put in a business meal, and that is a part of the documentation that we look for, and also a compliancy thing, because everybody at some point will go through the foreign corrupt policies training, and very important that we don't take out any government officials or entertain them. So that's why that it's very important to include the name, firm, and titles of everyone present at a business meal. Then I'm going to just select OK, which will bypass the approval. So again, now I've had a business meal with Ken, and now what's important here is, did it occur in BC or did it occur in Ontario? So let's just say Ken was visiting us. I would leave it as Ontario because he was visiting me in Ontario, the restaurant was in Ontario, and we would leave it at that. However, if I was visiting BC and that's where the meeting occurred, then I would switch that over to the BC business meal tax setting, just because that is the reflective tax setting for that meal. And let's just say it was $50 meal. And then again, for my coding, it's going to finance, and then this is the business meals column. Business meal code, sorry. And then last check here is, so I have my coding, I have the dates, everything is there, I have the attendees at the business meal, everything seems to be okay. And then I have to also enter the meeting place and location. Let's just say we went to Burrito Boys in Toronto. The next step here would be, now that this is all filled out, I would go ahead and Control-P PDF the file. And once I do that, I would actually save it as a Bluebeam document. And here in the thumbnails of Bluebeam, you could actually copy and paste images. So if I had another file, which was, let's just pretend that this was the receipts, I can actually copy this page, enter it into my expense report form, and now I have my expense report and the backups all attached. And then the next step would be to go ahead and actually approve from the employee side and sign your expense report with your digital signature. And sorry, I'm forgetting my password today. Then you would go ahead and approve it. and now I've signed and I have all my backups and everything ready, I would go ahead and send this to my supervisor, who would then review it and return it to me, and then I would send it in for processing. So that's just, a quick review of an example of how to submit your expense report. Next, this is just a reminder for compliance, because I had said we were going to go back to this. So this is just a reminder for everyone. You can always refer to the official compliance memo that was sent out not too long ago. It probably will be on TKN soon if it is not already. So here are just some of the tips here. So the most senior person at Turner pays for the business meal and expenses it. So what that means is, let's say you went out with, a project manager, and you're, let's say, a junior intern at Turner, and you guys went to a business meal. Who should pay for that business meal? With Turner's policies, it's the most senior person. So the project manager would go ahead and pay for the business meal and expense it. It wouldn't be the other way around, where the intern pays for the project manager and then the intern expenses it. So that's just an example of that. Gift cards must only be purchased by the FM. We're no longer accepting expense reports with gift cards. Actually, we never did to begin with. So job site materials. So these are to be purchased directly through the vendor unless there is a just reason why it was unreasonable to follow our policy. And again, the policy can be found on TKN. Charitable contributions, 100% must go through a check request. Group events, including sport tickets, any invoice billed directly to Turner, such as items that require a contract. Computer hardware purchases, including phone and accessories, any assets, and any job site monthly expenses, permits, and again, just make sure you have the proper documentation so we're compliant with our policies. Next, we're just going to go through the proper documentation for all expenses. So what we're looking for is, if it's just during the regular course of business, what Turner is looking for is a detailed invoice with the receipt, itinerary, and payment details. Expenses that are outside the normal course of business, this does tend to happen here and there, not as much, but let's just say, for example, for this meeting that we're having right now, for some reason my laptop charger broke, there was no spare chargers in the office, and I just really needed it to get the meeting going. And then I reached out to IT, and they said, hey, look, we can't get you a charger until Monday, so we recommend you just go down to the Best Buy and purchase it and expense it. So you see, so that's, if we go back to our compliance policy, that is typically not accepted, because it's a computer hardware purchase. Anything to do with IT should be procured directly through IT. So what I would do is, because this was outside the normal course, I would include my receipt with the payment details, but I would also include either the authorization letter or the email from IT that indicates this was approval for a special circumstance where it was unreasonable to follow the policy. And then that way it reduces the amount of follow-ups you have with our audit team, and that way essentially it just gets you reimbursed quicker, which is, everyone's preference. Next, expenses incurred in the U.S. or another country. So this is typically with exchange rates. So if you incur an expense in the U.S., you would most likely have paid U.S. dollars. But if you use your Canadian credit card, the actual Canadian dollar value should be on your credit card statement. So all that we ask is the original invoice from the U.S. Purchase or vendor, and then a credit card statement highlighting just the USD transaction that you incurred and the conversion rate for that Canadian dollar value. And lastly, for mileage, we're looking for a Google Maps itinerary stating the from and to locations, like actual addresses, so that way we can confirm the distance that was traveled and ensure that it's project sites and just ensure you're compliant with our Turner Auto policy. So yeah, without further ado, we're just going to jump into the Q&A and hopefully answer some of the questions here. So I'm just going to unmute everybody. So if you guys want to speak directly through, you should be able to do that. So just to touch base on Ken's question right here. So he's asking, what if you had a conversation with IT and there are no email backups? So Ken, unfortunately, we got to look at it from like an auditor's perspective because, you know, all the expense reports are actually stored in SAP. So when, you know, internal audit or let's say EY audits us, they won't generally accept that verbal communication as the approval that you had. So it's best to get an email. But in special circumstances, you know, it would be best to get an email from the person who's authorized you to do something outside the normal course. So I would prefer that it is actually an email backup and verbal approvals will actually not be accepted. But again, it's circumstantial. So generally, the FM can override that approval given there's a just reason why you could not provide the backup. But we are generally looking for a backup. Quite quiet today. Did anybody else have any questions?
Can you tell me how do you do a meal allowance with no receipts when you're on a suitcase?
A meal allowance with no receipts. Okay. So this would be your suitcase assignment, correct, John?
Correct. It's in my agreement, but how do I do with no receipts? I don't know how to do it.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So what you would do is you would go ahead and on the actual expense report form, you would enter the amount for your meal allowance. And under the purpose, you would state it as other, right? And you could do it on preferably do it on a per day basis. So that way on the ledger, it actually hits the ledger on a per day, which is best for, our clients and our own accounting ledger. But you would actually include from a backup point of view, a copy of your agreement. Of course, you can feel free to black out what is not relevant to the meal allowance, but we would need the agreement to go ahead and proceed with the per diem.
Yeah, correct. But would I need a WBS number?
Pardon me?
Would I require a WBS code?
Yes, absolutely. So you would generally on a suitcase, if you're assigned to a specific job, you would code it to that specific job, and that WBS number you should be able to get directly from the project manager who's managing the budget.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Did anyone else have any questions?
You'd mentioned that you'd go a little more into the vehicle allowance.
Sure, yeah. What did you want to know, Preston?
I haven't used it. I should be using it. So I'm unfamiliar. I'm completely unfamiliar with it.
Okay. Yeah, so...
I do have a vehicle allowance.
Okay, yeah. So for vehicle allowance, for employees that have a vehicle allowance, the only I guess separate thing would be that when you are pretty much filling out your expense report for the first time and saving your template, you would just select yes to auto allowance, and what that does is adjusts your rate for the mileage, which tends to be, as of right now, currently 12 cents per kilometer instead of the 54 cents for those who don't have an auto allowance. And from a actual, I guess, expense point of view, if it is permitted in the auto policy for you to expense, even though you have an auto allowance, you could go ahead and do that. It's just at the reduced rate.
Okay. Yeah, so this is for above, over and above.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
And if you want me to send you the auto policy as well, I can go ahead and do that offline, Preston, if you want.
Sure, that'd be great. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. No worries.
I also, the presentation had just connected briefly when you were talking about the broken charger example. Mm-hmm. So I missed that. Was that where the email tied in? That if you had an email from somebody at IT saying, "Go ahead and get a charger."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if someone tells you to do, like, let's say for example, IT had said, for this specific case, it's unreasonable that you'd have to wait 5 days for a supplier to send you the charger. Just go ahead and expense it. As long as you have that email, you would just go ahead and PDF it and include it in your submission. And what that would do is, for the auditors, usually we would question it as, okay, well, why is an IT item purchased? We would then see your email and say, oh, okay, that makes sense. It was a special circumstance that permitted it, right? And similar to, like, we're a construction company, and, there are urgent things that come up, right? And when it's unreasonable, you may have your operations manager or your general manager to kind of make a call on something and just tell you to proceed with a certain way. So you can do that. Just make sure you have the backup and the documentation to verify and make it easier for those who are auditing you. So that way we can actually get you reimbursed as soon as possible, right? Because we want to get it to the 2-week time frame.
I see. One more, if you don't mind. When it came to materials purchasing, so yeah. There's suppliers out here that we don't have relationships or accounts with. What is the intention? How are we supposed to proceed?
Yes. So with the job site materials, I guess that's the sensitive one. So we do have accounts at Home Depot and a couple other suppliers. I know at least in Toronto there's a bunch that we use with our carpentry team, but in Vancouver I'm not as familiar with how many different vendors are available for job site materials. But generally, we could get purchasing to kind of set them up, or even accounting, finance to do that. Usually the process is if you see or anticipate a need on your site to use a specific vendor that's just a supplier, you can actually request them to send you a bill to get the ball rolling. However, some companies will request us to fill out a credit application to get set up in the system. So if you have that concern, you could actually send it over to your internal finance team, and they can actually get the vendor set up and allow you to go ahead and purchase the job site materials from that vendor.
What would you estimate the turnaround time on that would be?
For getting a vendor set up?
Yeah, I guess one of the reasons is often this kind of comes up at deficiencies, or when something unplanned comes up that has a quick timeline. And that, otherwise, of course, we'd always have the solution through putting it in somebody's contract, or have a supplier have one of our regular suppliers have time to provide it for us. But if it's a quick item that's just not going to work, is that then do you explain that it's quick because of these reasons on your form? And
yeah, I agree. I mean, I mean, if it's unreasonable, so Turner's policy regarding the job site materials is generally we want Turner to pay for it directly. It's just that's the preferred method. However, if it's unreasonable to follow the policy, like for example, you're doing deficiencies, you need a material today, or like yesterday, and it just there was no way that you were going to get that, and it was going to take like your lead time was like 2 weeks on getting it through a vendor. You've checked all the vendors. As long as it's clearly evident that it was unreasonable for you to go and purchase that through a vendor, which you had no access because you verified, you can still claim it as an expense. However, if you have an approval from your operations manager, it always helps because that way we know that it's an operational concern, and we know that it's already been brought up to the OM and they're okay with it, and if that is the case, then we're fine with it as well. And we can always look to find you a vendor to fill it up, so next time when you have that concern, we have a vendor ready to go to supply.
Yeah, as we mature, that'll certainly get easier.
Yeah, and over time, it should get easier, like you said.
Okay, it's John again. Got a question.
Yep.
I put my total expense in. It deducts the HST, GST, but then it doesn't transfer anything over to expenses less taxes. What happens then?
Okay, so John, you're saying that you're putting the total items here in the total expense column?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And then it tells me, I tell it I'm in Ontario, right? So it tells me I'm paying HST, but then it doesn't. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 locations where the total expense tax didn't show up.
Okay. I may have to take that one offline with you just to see, because it could just be a problem with the expense form or something getting corrupted or something of that sort.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's all.
Yeah. Sorry, because that one I kind of need to look at what you're seeing in order for me to, be able to provide you.
Yeah, what I can do, I can fax you this one. Okay.
Yeah.
You can see what's happening. Because this expense is not going into the end of the month, right? Okay, so I just do it pre-loan. I'll send it to you tomorrow.
Sounds good, John. Appreciate it. Okay, did anyone else have any more questions? Leave it for last call. If anybody has any more questions, we're glad to answer them.
Oh, the other thing is we have to send everything now as per Bluebeam?
Yeah, preferably. I mean, any PDF document is fine. As long as it's PDF, it's fine. It just we like to have one PDF package with all the backups and the receipts. That just allows us to process quickly.
So your form is also being sent as a PDF then? You're not, and then what, you're like optical character on the form that we're filling out?
Yeah, so actually your expense report form does get sent as a PDF to a couple other parties before it actually gets processed, and they only accept it as one package, one PDF package. So I mean, it's just like kind of like a lean initiative to ensure that it's just one PDF package all the way through.
Yeah, but I mean, so you're actually taking it's no longer like a electronic file anymore, unless you use it like an OCR or something to, or do you just you're inputting into something completely different, so it doesn't matter if it's a PDF, it's just like a receipt, I guess, for you.
For us, it's actually a PDF document all the way through, and what happens with it is it goes into SAP, and they're actually manually coding it. And just to give you a tip, when you're sending expenses, this is just a tip. You don't have to do it this way, but if you send in your Excel sheet that you used as well, it generally helps the folks in Cincinnati when they process it. So if you have that and you're willing to send that as well, it just you can send the PDF and the Excel, and it just helps them process it more quickly because they actually manually input the codes. So if they can copy and paste it, it just makes it easy.
I see.
Yeah. All right, guys. So I didn't get any more questions. So unless anyone has any more, we were gonna, close the call now. So I appreciate everyone's time for joining, and I thank you guys for your time, and I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend.
Yep. Thanks.
Take care, guys. Bye.
Thanks.